Welcome to episode number 6 of the Fireside Football Chat series, my way of keeping in touch with the football world during the off season. I'm the only one on this stage with an off season because my guest today, Jared Smith, he has no off season. I think he had yesterday off. That was about it. But this should be a lot of fun. Jared's very busy. We're going to hear about your journey, Fox Sports, the Bet US show, how you balance all this stuff together. I mean, you're a smiling guy, you're fit. There's so much to talk about. So first of all, how are you today?
Oh, I'm great, Ron. Honestly, so I appreciate you, waking up early with me. I know it's early out on the West Coast here, but this is normal time for me. Dog's usually up between 6 and 7 a.m. So I usually start my day pretty early and I get a chance to, try at least to get ahead. I know it's hard to get ahead of the market on the West Coast because the real East Coasters are up at 6 a.m., which is like 3 a.m. for my time. But it's a beautiful, beautiful morning here in Las Vegas.
Yeah, weather's cooperating. Everything's good. Springtime, no complaints really out here. So we're good. We are going to talk about the draft and free agency, but first, there's a journey to talk about here because you kind of came, as I understand it, just one day said, I'm moving to Las Vegas. And in thinking about how I wanted to scope and shape the show, I kind of wanted to get your impression of what was day one like? What was day 7 like? What was day 31 like? I mean, how did it go that first day and that first month in Vegas?
So the Vegas thing happened so quickly. So this was 2022. We were just coming out of the pandemic. I was actually during the height of lockdown, like March 2020, I was living in Manhattan at that time. Eerie time to be living in Manhattan. I mean, I remember walking a couple days after the lockdown. I remember walking down 3rd Avenue on the Upper East Side, and it's like I Am Legend. Like no one, it's just like empty. Very eerie time. I was living in a very small studio apartment at the time on the Upper East Side. And it was after my divorce. My dad had just passed. Like it was a really rough time for me personally. So I kind of limped along in the city for another few months. And then once we got to the summer and the weather started getting warmer, I was like, I got to get out of the city. So at that time I moved to Jersey City, not too far away from where I was at the time. I was still in New York City, regionally. And I was in Jersey City was great. I was in Jersey City for, a little over a year. And then in 2022, I kind of started to get that itch. I was like, I don't know if New York's right for me. I have a lot of personal, stuff that went down here and, maybe I need a change. And it's funny. I went to a bachelor party. This was April of 22. I went to a bachelor party in Scottsdale, Arizona. And April in New York is miserable weather. It's springtime. It's cloudy all the time. It's like 40, 50 degrees every day. It's rainy. You don't really get those really nice days until like later May and June. And I remember getting off the plane in Scottsdale in April, and I'm looking around and I'm feeling my body in this like desert climate. And I'm like, wow, like this really feels good. And then 4 months later, I'm in Vegas by August of 22. So it was a really quick, hey, I don't feel right in New York. I think I need a change. And then I just packed up my car, sold my furniture, got the dog in, and we drove to Vegas. The first day was, it was hot. It was August 22 and, the middle of the desert. It was hot. I remember moving into the apartment and feeling that, a sense of renewal. Ironically enough, I was in negotiations with Fox during my move. They actually reached out to me as I was planning the move. I actually did the interview with Don Martin, the former head of Fox Sports Radio. He retired recently, in my apartment in Jersey City with all boxes around me. It was a very, cathartic kind of move because it felt like as I was moving, I was also kind of falling into my dream job. And that was the first month was really just focusing, getting up to speed on football season in a new routine, in a new environment. August is a very busy month for us in the NFL world.
Sure.
So that was a challenge. But also once I got settled in, the first few months were a dream. I really settled into the desert and the climate, and I found a nice little social niche. And then once we got past that first year, that's when I really started focusing on me and my health and my fitness and a lot of the other things that I was neglecting in New
Mhm.
York because I was just trying to survive.
So, when did you first have your first job in Las Vegas then? Was it through Fox? Did it happen relatively quickly after you landed here?
Yeah, so the Fox job was all remote, which was really nice because throughout that time, and I was still
Sure.
working at Pixwise at the time. That first football season in Vegas, 22 into 23, that was my last season at Pixwise. I was 2 years at Pixwise. The first year was 22; it was in New York, and then that last year, so I was balancing Pixwise and Fox that first season. I knew towards the end of the year that Pixwise wasn't going to renew me. So at that time, December of 22 ish, I started looking for new jobs. I was working, on the side with VSiN at the time. They were bringing me on for a lot of guest spots.
Uh-huh.
So I accelerated that relationship and I started doing more work with them. So I would say that's the time that I got my first Vegas job. The Fox job was always remote. So I get to do that from home, which is really nice. And then the following year is when I started working with BetQL, now the BetMGM network. And we did that Vegas show every Sunday from Mandalay. And I did that all of last season with Brandon Marshall, the Broncos linebacker. So, the VSiN relationship has kind of tapered off a bit. They went through their ownership changes, and I wasn't a part of their new strategy this year. But the relationship with BetMGM Network is very strong. And we'll be doing the show, at least to my understanding, every Sunday again this football season. Not at Mandalay. We moved locations. MGM's dealing with some studio stuff, but still a Vegas show in the Vegas Odyssey studio with an on-site location, which is fun. So really, that's really the only Vegas job I have right now is the BetMGM network. Everything else I do is pretty much remote.
Yeah, I see. Well, it's still balancing a lot of shows. You have the weekend shows. You then have the Bet US show, which is on a Wednesday, I believe.
Yep.
So some of the other days of the week are theoretically open, but there's also prep that goes on there. So walk us through what it's like to manage multiple shows and the prep part of it.
The good news is it's all kind of feeding the same master in a sense. So a lot, especially during NFL season, which is so routine based. Like the Monday is the end of the week. We do the Monday night game. Tuesday morning, really Monday night, almost during the game, a lot of times because I do a segment with BetMGM Network every Monday night during football season around 6 o'clock Pacific. So as I'm prepping for that segment, that part of that prep is the next week's games. And then usually it's during the Monday night game. So I'm absorbing the Monday night game. That's the last piece of the puzzle in terms of updating the ratings for the following week. But then by Tuesday morning, I am already fully onto the following week. We have the show on Wednesday with, Chris and Fez. And by Tuesday night, I'm pretty much fully prepped for that show. I don't do a lot on Wednesday morning besides, finalize any picks that I may have or any opinions that I may have not fully absorbed or, manifested from the following, from the prior week. But by Tuesday night, I'm pretty much fully prepped for the next week of games. And obviously things change. Injuries will change
Sure.
my handicapping process, or news might, pop in and I might have to update some of my notes. But I have, I do an Excel spreadsheet. It's actually the Excel spreadsheet now has gone back about 4 years of show prep. Like I have almost 4 years and I keep the prep for every show. It's like a daily journal. I just
Yeah.
open up the day and whatever show is happening on that day, I have all my notes. So for the Wednesday show with Fez and Chris, I'm working on that on Monday night. I have my Wednesday spot and I've already got all the games that are happening that week in the NFL. I usually do what the look ahead lines were. I like to talk about, what the game was the prior week. If it was a fluky result or if it was a real result, like did this team lose yards per play but win the game? Those are all little, notations that I'll make. And then, just making sure I have questions and relevant things to give to Fez and Chris on the Wednesday show. And then as we move forward into the week, I do a Friday segment for Fox Sports Radio with Doug Gottlieb. That's already prepped because I've already done all the work prior in the week. Same thing with college football, that I do all my college football work usually after the NFL show. So I'm a little behind on college football. I'll do some college football work Sunday, but my college football prep for the Saturday Fox show usually takes place between Wednesday night, Thursday into Friday. So you're right. There's really no break. It's really a continuous weave of prep and then absorbing and then prep and then absorbing. And you've really got to get into a nice rhythm because it really does take over a lot of your time.
And the other thing that's different from my perspective is you're kind of the host of the show, at least on the Wednesday, and you might and maybe co-host on some of the other shows. So you have a little bit of extra prep because you're actually feeding these guys information and you're coming up with the nuggets that you come up and you ask them to concentrate on certain topics. So you're gleaning that in last week's box score prep and stuff like that and a timely topic. So that's a little extra work.
It is. And I think the key is, so if there's any young handicappers watching that want to do content, I think you have to know what your role is and know what your strengths are when you're doing content. Like I'm a broadcaster first. I went to school for broadcasting. I've been broadcasting sports since 2006, really professionally. I think that is my strength. That was always my strength. The gambling stuff came later. That's more of a newer muscle that I've learned how to flex. So when I prep for a show, for example, the Wednesday show with Chris and Fez, just like when you know your teams and your players, you have to know who your co-hosts are. You have to know what their strengths and weaknesses are and then feed into that. That's how good content is created. If everyone just focuses on themselves and what they're talking about, especially if they're hosting the show, and they're just like, here's what I'm liking, here's what my analysis is, and what do you think about the game, Chris or Fez? Boring. I need to know what they excel in and what they aren't good at talking about and make sure that I tee them up in those areas. So that's how you get a good dialogue going on shows. And that's all just knowing your co-hosts and understanding their strengths and weaknesses. That's another layer of prep for every show. I usually have at least one or two questions tailored specifically for Chris and Fez on every show. Like, I know Chris likes to talk about this. This game has this in it. Let's make sure we connect that dot. Same thing with Fez. He likes to do the math stuff. So anytime I am going through my handicapping process and I have a math-based question, even if I know the answer to it, odds are the audience doesn't. So I make sure that goes in that game prep. Like, again, like these are just other layers that I think about when I'm trying to weave a show together. Now, on the Saturday show on Fox, I'm the analyst. It's a different role.
Yeah.
I get asked those questions. I kind of chime in when brought into my role. It's a different layer of prep. I have significantly more notes about stats and yards per play and all this nerd stuff than I do on the BetUS show, which to me is more of a point guard role. I need to make sure that Chris and Fez have an opportunity to bring that to the table. So it is a bit of a different prep. And I think depending on what kind of show and who your co-hosts are, a handicapper who does content needs to tweak their process as well.
Yeah, I love that balance and I love that description because really the behind the scenes stuff, people are just tuning into a show and they want this, they want that. They don't realize what goes into the show before you even hit that press live button and how to keep it moving and how to keep it rolling. And there's another balance I want to talk about. You mentioned this, and I've spoken on past shows with Brady Cannon, who's won contests. He's a handicapper. He knows his golf. He knows his football. And he's also had a career in broadcasting, a long career in broadcasting. And Kate Constable last week became a handicapper second and was into the broadcasting first. Now you're meshing the two and you're picking up a lot of information on your shows because you're actually working with two professionals. I mean, you're working with ex-NFL or NBA players on other shows. You're working with two professionals on a Wednesday show. There are other shows you're interacting. How has your personal handicapping journey evolved over the last couple of years?
I can't even recognize what I did before compared to what I do now, Ron. Like, I go back and I look at stuff so my first job in gambling media was 2019 for SportsGrid. And recently I went back and I watched some of those older clips because I was trying to do like a wow, you look just physically a lot different now than back then. So let's do a transition. But then I was watching a little bit of it and listening to what I was saying. And it was just nonsense. I mean, it was, relevant nonsense, but nonsense in terms of the gambling advice that I was giving out. It was very frat bro gambling advice. And not to say that I was like not capable of giving better advice. I just was an infant in terms of giving other people gambling advice. Like the gambling landscape, the difference between gambling for yourself and gambling for other people, there's a different level of fiduciary responsibility and just, I guess, certainty that comes across very negatively with the current level of handicappers that I see on social media selling picks or trying to promote their brand. I think that is something that the modern day, especially younger generation, like I'm almost 40 years old, so I don't consider myself like a youngin' anymore. Like I consider myself more in the middle age. Like I have life experience. There's a younger generation of this industry now coming into power. The level of certainty they have, it's the enemy of growth. Like this is definitely going to happen. This team is definitely going to win. Like again, like that level of confidence, overconfidence is how you lose in this space. So I think that's been my biggest change. Like I've noticed my confidence level, my bravado for what I'm talking about significantly decrease because I've learned that you don't know shit. Like our buddy Dave Sherapan, kind of his motto has really taken hold because I think, understanding that this is all random and we're just trying to find the best number and put ourselves in the best position to win. Then once the game starts, we have no idea what's really going to happen. Like, I think that level of certainty has dropped, which has allowed me to be more flexible with a lot of the things that I'm talking about, learning. Like if you know everything, if you're certain, you're not going to learn anything. And I think that's been the biggest adjustment for me. I've just become a lot more open to different strategies, different ideas, and becoming less certain about my knowledge and trying to learn from other people.
Yeah, there's no one way to do things to get this right, but there's definitely several ways to do this wrong. And so you want to avoid those. And we'll talk about that. I have some slides that I shared last week with Kate, and I want to share with you because when we get into that mix of what's a professional bettor, what's a professional handicapper, it's not a straight line. You're still continuous learning along the way. But one of the things I've learned along the way, which is a longer amount of Earth years than you, is that the more things change and rules change all the time and this and that, and, especially in the college game, but the more things also stay the same. You still win the game by blocking the other person and knocking them off the line of scrimmage. There's still some things that really don't change. The fundamental of who's survival of the fittest kind of thing. And it just, you work it into the rules. You're a little bit more innovative because you're not always kicking on 4th and 4 from the 40-yard line anymore. So there are some things, and we'll talk about that a little. I'm very process driven in terms of that. I know a lot of the shows give it, what's your pick? What's your pick? What's your pick? And I know your shows, I can speak specifically for the one that I know the best, the Bet US show, is you're giving up picks, but every once in a while, there's a lot of process going on, which is what we share. One of your co-hosts, Chris and I, we have our weekly phone call kind of thing. And we're not necessarily giving out picks. We're just laying out what we saw, what we viewed last week, and how can we incorporate it into your handicapping. How has that process method become more a part of your handicapping genre thing?
That's really it. I think if we lived in an ideal world, there would be a rule against giving out picks.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like, well, I'll rephrase that. There would be more of a filter. There would be more of a process to people being allowed to do that. I think people giving out information that's what we're all about. Information. The pick itself, I think, is like it's almost like if you go to the grocery store and buy the groceries yourself, or are you hiring a personal chef to come to your house and cook it yourself and cook it?
Mm-hmm.
Most people, unless they're going out for a meal, but let's just use the groceries example here.
Mm-hmm.
I would say 99% of people, when they buy groceries at the store, they are then going home, cooking it, and making the meal themselves, and then serving it to their family. So that's the information, right? The groceries are the information in this example. The personal chef is the pick. That's the guy coming or the woman coming to your house, using the ingredients that you already purchased at the store, cooking a meal, and then serving it to you on your, at your dinner table. Like usually only the richest of the rich do that. I know there was a Bill Parcells example. If they're going to pay me to, buy the groceries, they should allow me to cook the meal too. And I think that comes down to me, that's a perfect gambling metaphor. I think if I am giving you the groceries and you are shopping for them, you're watching the show, which means you're shopping for the groceries, my groceries at my grocery store. You should then go home and cook the meal yourself. I can't press the submit bet button for you.
Mm-hmm.
I can only tell you so many times what I'm personally betting on. Multiple things could be true. The number could be gone. The number that I got last week is gone.
Sure.
So I'm just giving you what I bet, which is irrelevant because the number's gone. Or B, you're not betting the same amount as me. So there's just so many different, if I'm giving you a bet, there's so many things that are different in the process from when I bet it to now when the time that you're going to bet it. Unless literally I'm betting, we do the live bets on the show. That is probably the best example of when you should be tailing a pick immediately. If we're giving it out live on the show. But the picks that we already have in pocket and the things that we do weeks before, it's hard to duplicate that. So I always tell people, I'll tell you what groceries to buy, but you need to go home and cook the meal yourself. This is what I'm on. This is how I got there. But you need to go home and figure out if this is right for you. So I think there's a big gap between process and picks in our industry. Mm-hmm. And I wish less people would give picks and more people would just give process. And I think unless we ever get to that point as a gambling society, we're going to have the mess and all the garbage that we see on social media most days with this pick and that pick. There's a big gap in the industry, I think, between process and picks, and not enough people focus on the process. Too many people focus on the picks, but I get it. People want picks, supply and demand. Why
Sure.
would you not give the audience something that they desperately want? So there's that element to it, that it's business. If the people want something and we're going to withhold it from them, well, we're not going to make a lot of money as a company, probably.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, but July and August prep for me is just so important. And that's part of the weekly work, is that this result happened, but I'm not surprised. Other people might be surprised, but I saw this game differently. Or it could be the flip. I didn't see this coming. I need to adjust. So There's a lot of behind the scenes thing. You talked about live betting, and that's a blessing and a curse, because there's nothing more than a thrill of pressing that button and say, oh, what you made sense. I'm going to live bet this. Even Chris and I have done that on our show. We've talked it out. We've talked the process and said, wait a second, this is a good deal. We're networking right now. And networking is such a key word. But the flip side to that is, how do you and how do others who are watching you understand how to bet slot that? Meaning that you're adding a bet to the portfolio. Where does it fit? Does it skew your alignment out? Do you have 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever it is? You better have some sort of alignment or preconceived idea of where it's going in. So there's a thrill and a danger to live betting.
Yes, I agree. I think live betting actually is, with certain sports, preferred. Like for college basketball, for example, I make a ton of live bets throughout the game. They're usually smaller. Like if I do a unit, 1% for a regular bet, half usually for a live bet. Especially if it's a money line, like a big, for example, Florida the other night, I took a little, I was on Houston big, 2 units on Houston. I got a great boost price on them plus money in town. But when Florida, fell behind, I was like, oh, wow, I can get 3-1, 2-1 on Florida right now. I'm going to take a little bit, just to balance it a little bit. So I'm not completely exposed. I'll do that a lot for college basketball. I don't do that as much for the NFL. Also, the hard part about the NFL is all of the games are on in the same time. So you've got to be, whereas college basketball, you're betting a high profile game. It's usually a standalone game, Final Four, Elite Eight, although this year the Final Four was overlapping with the Crown. Don't get me started on that. But for the most part, the Elite Eight and the Final Four are standalone college basketball games. Those are the ones that everyone's watching. I will definitely live bet those. NFL games, same thing. I took some live on the Super Bowl. I thought the Chiefs were going to come back. I took a little live Chiefs right there in the Super Bowl. I was on the Eagles for the game. I was like, oh, wow, Chiefs are down big. I'll take a little Chiefs here. That's very common, but it's usually half or quarter of what I would normally stake. I think to your question, it's actually funny because I just had this conversation with a friend yesterday about bet sizing. I think bet sizing is always one of the hardest things I think about every day because I'm constantly stressed on, is my bet size aligned with where I'm at right now with my bankroll? Do I need to make adjustments? Is a unit too small? Is it too big? And I'm constantly reevaluating where my bankroll is, how I particularly feel about this sport, whether it's early in the season, mid-season, late season. All of those factors are levers for me on how much I bet. I think most bets for me are 1%. I would say about 90 to 95% of my bets are one unit flat. This is what I like. Here's the game. Then we get into like the short-term futures market, like, for example, conference tournaments in college basketball. It's a 2-3 week bet. I'll usually ramp those up a little higher, especially because it's multiple games. So in my mind, it's, well, I'm going to be betting on this team for 2 or 3 games during this stretch. So a 2 or 3 unit wager kind of makes a little bit more sense. But then there's the long-term futures market that I almost feel I'm lowering my levers because I think at some point I'm going to buy or sell off of that bet, right? So like I want to leave myself a little room. Like, when you order a coffee at Starbucks, you want room for milk. I always want a little room for milk on a long-term 2, 3, 4 month futures bet because I'm probably going to put another half a unit on the other side or maybe double that. Like, again, so it's like you're constantly like levering up or down your bet sizing based off of what season you're in and where you're at. That is a constant struggle for me. And I haven't figured out the right formula yet. I'm constantly tweaking that formula. I think that's a really difficult thing for a lot of young handicappers to realize because all we see on social media is 10 unit, 20 unit whale bet. Like it's just, that bothers me. That's the quickest way for me to know if someone's not a real gambler or not.
Absolutely. And so we're morphing into the slides right now because I have a problem you see this on Twitter all the time, pros versus Joes or sharp versus not sharp. There's not one or the other. To me, it's a continuum and some people are here, some people are here, some people are here. My slide that I shared last week on professional bettor, there's a widely accepted definition that you're a professional bettor if that's your sole method of income, if that's how you're doing it. And while there's only maybe 2% that are professional handicappers, it's probably a lot less because a lot of people have tried and failed because they failed for various reasons that the other slides will talk about. I don't think all professionals are sharp. That's maybe a contrarian opinion, but a lot of professionals have money and they think they're good at it, but they fall along the way. But their best characteristic to me is they're not married to a team. Oh, I really love this team, so I'll give 7, even though it was 6 or something like that. Or, I don't care that it's a half a point higher. The professionals have tunnel vision with that. Any comments on this?
So the widely accepted definition, I agree. In fact, I think I'm at the point now in my journey where I've floated the idea of, because like right now, for example, I'm out of season, right? Like I only have 1 show a week with Fox. During NFL season, I have 3 shows per week, significantly busier. So during this downtime that I have, what am I going to do with the downtime? I can go work out. I can go spend time with the dog. But what's my professional development during that time? Well, I could seek other opportunities on other shows, but there's a shelf life. Like, I have to go back to football season in 3-4 months. I can't really be a full-time employee somewhere else and then say, oh, by the way, in August, I'm gone. What do I do with that time? Well, just bet more. Like, just spend that time enriching my gambling, situation. So I am slowly, I'm not there yet, slowly migrating towards the fact that maybe in the off season for football, I can do professional gambling, like where that's what I do every day. I wake up, I gamble, and then I do it again the next day. And it's really my job. I've toyed with that idea. And I think, to go to the next slide, the 2% theory, I think you have to be radically honest with yourself about where you are, how much money you can actually make doing it, and what your history is. For example, a few years ago, NBA and NHL were a big part of my portfolio. I would gamble on NBA and NHL pretty regularly, and golf, frankly. Now that I've kind of evolved to this level of, all right, I'm taking this very seriously, NBA and NHL are not even part of my equation anymore. Will I make a bet occasionally on a playoff game, high profile? Sure. But Major League Baseball has always been my bread and butter in the spring and summer. And that's what I focus on solely. That's it. Once college basketball season ends. So you have to be brutally honest with yourself about what you're betting, how successful you are betting it, and can you sustain a lifestyle of betting all the sports in this time and continue to be successful at it. You have to know what you know and know what you don't know. I don't even track NBA and NHL anymore because I don't bet enough to for me to waste time tracking it. Baseball is my sole focus between now and when we get to football season. And with that, through that lens, I feel like I can slowly make the transition to actually doing it professionally. I don't think I'm there yet, but maybe in a year or two, I will be. Not all professionals are sharp is funny. I know a lot of square pros.
Yeah.
And they're great guys. And I think a lot of them would admit that they're not the sharpest of pros. Some of them probably wouldn't, but most of them hopefully have enough, self-awareness to know where they're at. Like, for example, like I don't consider myself this like Mr. Sharp. I think I know what I know. I'm really good at situational handicapping, but there's a lot of parts of gambling that I'm not really good at yet. And I'm working on them. I think the numbers game, to your point too, is essential. Absolutely essential to understand bias and how bias works in our head, in our brain, and to be able to essentially be a ninja, a Jedi mindset and not have it impact your decision-making at all. Very, very difficult to do.
My not argument, but my conversation with Kate last week was when I went up to the key characteristics, which are on the next slides. You could see that people develop these characteristics over time. And my guess is that where you were 2 or 3 years ago to where you are now, you have many of these characteristics. The one thing that we all guard against is you can be lax on 1 or 2 of the characteristics and ruin everything. But the more of these that you have, the better. So I just put some together. Not everybody models or creates power numbers, but if you do that and you have a set routine that can work, that could be an edge for somebody. Understands and never strays from money management. Yeah. I mean, don't all of a sudden say you have a lock of the year, or because the game's on a Monday, I have to bet it because it's the end of the week. I've got to settle up. That's the biggest thing we heard over the time. Edges in certain markets. To me, for example, the example I gave is that I'm not that proficient in totals. I have some kind of modeling that I do for various weeks, week 1, week 18, the bowl games and stuff like that. Yeah. But I would consider myself not an expert in over-under, so I don't bet a lot of them because I'm not going to get a lot of profit from them. And then the whole thing about chasing impulse betting, if you are adding a live bet, it's because you have some rationale behind it or you've networked it. Exactly. I'm going to go quickly to another slide here. Tracks performance. Personally, I think that's very important. Not if you're making small wagers, but if you're really serious about this in any way, that you're evaluating what works and what's not. Do you win more with favorites? Do you win more in the Southeast Conference? Do you win more week 1 versus once you have data? What's your edge kind of thing? the bankroll money management, when to make adjustments, rule changes, and so on, but not making adjustment for the sake of adjustment because you had a bad week, because every model in the history of modeling will have a bad week. And then to me, and I know you do this as well, embracing advanced preparation. So we're not surprised and we don't have a knee-jerk reaction to what we just saw on Sunday afternoon. Comments so far?
I agree 100%. Can you go back to the last slide? I want to go through them
Sure.
all one by one and quickly. So I don't originate lines. I don't model. That's not a strength for me. I know people who do. They're much smarter than me. They're data science, computer science, people that have algorithmic, Excel, serious Excel, nerd, Excel nerds. I'm getting to the point where I'm creating my NFL power ratings, very basic. So I took physics from a couple years ago, and I've been kind of, updating them over the years, since. This will be the first year that I feel like I don't need physics or, week one ratings in order for me to have a pretty good sense of where things are at, based off of the transition that I had last year into this year, and now doing that transition again without the training wheels of what are physics first, week one numbers, because I use those numbers pretty significantly, at least last year. And then as we got through the year, I kind of strayed off it, made my own manual adjustments. Money managed. So I think my strengths, are 2 and 4 on this list. I think because of my finance background, working at Merrill Lynch and AllianceBernstein and understanding risk management and having years of that training under my belt, I think that has allowed me to understand the element of money management and when to up your risk and throttle down your risk. I think that is something I am an expert in. And I think that's something that every gambler needs to have, at least rudimentary tools in their tool belt. Understanding when it's time to walk away from the screen and take a lap.
Yeah.
I think a lot of younger bettors have a lot of impulses and they're not disciplined. That word, discipline, is the most important word in my vocabulary. You can go to the next slide now. I think the edges in unique markets, NFL draft, college football bowl season, those are my specialties. Historically, I have crushed those two entities. Kind of average on college football sides and totals. I've tracked it now for 5 years. I have a pretty good sense of where I'm at. Kind of average, maybe slightly below average, frankly, during the regular season. But for some reason, in bowl season, the situational handicapping goes way up.
Yeah.
And that's where I am stronger. And I think that's where I have a slight edge. NFL draft, I think there's two entities that a journalist has an edge in. I think one is the draft, and I think two are the awards markets. Why? Because that's where the information is. In the awards markets in NFL, Major League Baseball, the journalists are the ones voting for the awards. So who better to handicap a journalist than a fellow journalist? So I think that is a market that someone who works in a broadcasting journalist space, if you have connections in those areas, you might have a unique edge in those markets. Same thing with the NFL draft. If you know the right people, you're going to get good information. The tracking has been a project for me over the last 5 years. I started tracking my picks in 2021. The first year I was just like, what the hell am I doing? 2022 is when I started to develop a little more of a system with tracking. I was able to start getting unique elements into the spreadsheet, like what the average odds were on my bets. Different categories, like you said, favorites, SEC, unders, overs, props, this. Then you have to collect that data. And over a 2-3 year stretch, now I can look back on my last, let's say, 3 years of NFL betting. And I can say, I'm not really good at betting on this. Maybe you should bet less of it. A good example of it is Major League Baseball. I have been very heavy with the nerfy stuff over the last 2 years. Well, I'm not really good at betting it, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm kind of a coin flip nerfy better. Maybe I should bet less nerfies.
Yeah.
Like it's not rocket science here. And that market itself, I've spent so much time, information. I need so much information. You almost overanalyze something that's a 6-out bet, 10% of a Major League Baseball game, 1 inning out of 9, essentially. Maybe you should look more first 5. Like, I think once you collect the data, then you have to be mature enough to analyze it without bias because you're analyzing yourself. And some people don't like calling out negative things about themselves, but you have to be brutally honest with that data that you collect when you track your picks. The advanced preparation, you've really turned me on to this over the last year. There's two people that have really changed the way that I prep in terms of my writing. You and Clev TA, who I'm sure you're familiar
I
with.
thought you'd mention him because he does an excellent job as well.
Fantastic. His yearly, I've now read it 2 years cover to cover, his NFL guide. Mm-hmm. Just allowing my brain to kind of sync up with his, like a Bluetooth pairing. While I'm reading it, I can kind of get inside of his head of what he's looking for. And then I can obviously use his writing, but also use his process to apply it to my process. I think writing analytically is not fun. It's like eating your vegetables, but I think it really does cement a lot of concepts in your brain so that later on, when you're watching a game, when you're watching a season play out, those concepts are locked in here and you're like, how am I going to use that to handicap the next game?
Yeah.
I think that's really changed. That's really been my next level over the last year. You've helped me a lot with that. And so is Club TA. And I think a lot of that feeds the adjustments. Once you know what you're looking for, it's easier to make adjustments compared to when you're just looking at each game in a tunnel. And then you don't have that ability to kind of apply it to the rest of the broad handicapping world. I think the advanced preparation and the writing, I think that's really been, and I'm going to continue to, throttle up with that over the next few years as I continue to evolve. I really think that's changed a lot for me. I credit you and I credit Clev. You guys are really good at that.
We're able to make some adjustments. I'll have a college adjustment example I'll give in a couple of weeks where I was really high on a team. They led up until the last minute, 28-0. It looked great on paper. And what they did in that game caused me to flip my opinion. They didn't even make a bowl game. So wow. There's so much about advanced preparation. Very quickly here, disciplined and patient. We've talked about that. Embraces continuous learning. That thing you said about the new generation, know it all. Nobody knows it all. No. And the networking that you get privileged to be able to network with professionals, but you can also network silently by listening to podcasts. There's a lot of good things out there that you can align with. And these conclusions, which are personal conclusions, but you may want to put a different spin on it as well. If we talked about the not pros versus Joes, to me, it's hard to be an expert in more than one sport, but others, if you network correctly, maybe you can find some edges. Maybe there's some overlap in terms of the way people handicap sports and numbers. But ultimately, have a routine and stick with it. I prefer the methodical approach myself. Gets harder with age because I don't want to cut corners. But still, the motivation, once you get into it, you realize that you just have to have that kind of routine. I would never say to anybody, don't have a pizza bet on something, don't have an interest, you're going to something or whatever. So have fun with this. Don't make it all so, so stressful. Have some balance in it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the expert bullet point is really important. So that's been the biggest evolution with me. I used to give out bets and think I was an expert on everything. NBA, NHL, golf, soccer, like sports that I don't watch. Golf, the reason that I got into golf was because I played golf for so many years. I've been playing golf since I was 10 years old. But there's a difference between playing a sport and betting on a sport. Complete difference. Like not even in the same vicinity. And I don't watch enough golf today to warrant betting on it every week. I'll bet on the Masters this week. I'll throw a few pizza bets out on some guys that I like. But that might be the only golf event I bet on the whole year. Honestly, it might be. Maybe the U.S. Open. I just don't have the time or the capacity to bet it every week. And I've learned that about myself over time. Whereas in the past, when I was more younger, gung-ho, a little more brash, well, I'm going to be an expert on everything. There's only 4 sports now that I consider myself an expert on, and the perfect cycle of calendar in terms of my handicapping. Football, NFL, and college, right? Then we go right into college basketball. I do about an 8-week sprint from February to April on college basketball. College basketball ends and we're right into baseball season. Baseball season takes me right to September, right back to football. Like, that's it. Those are the only sports that I track, that I bet seriously. Everything else is significantly small wagers for entertainment purposes only. And I've learned that about myself over the last 2 years. Since I moved out to Vegas, I've learned that there is such a level of knowledge that you don't have unless you can dedicate the time to that specific sport. Mm-hmm. And there's only so many hours in the day. You can only dedicate. This is why when we get to the Aaron Rodgers part of the conversation, the content creator quarterback vibe just doesn't work. There's only so many hours in the day. I know how hard it is to be a content creator, Aaron. You can't do both. You can't be a professional quarterback and a professional content creator. There's only so many hours in the day. So that routine and that ability to diagnose what you are an expert in and then only focus on those things, it takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of humility to say, I am a moron when it comes to the NBA. I don't watch it. I don't like it. It's not something I do a lot of. So any advice that I give you should be taken on a very micro level. Hey, I heard this guy likes this. Here you go. Like that's about the gist of my NBA advice. Now, in the playoffs, when I'm watching the games intently, game to game, I can give you a little vibe of what's happening, but I'm not an NBA handicapper, and I've learned that about myself over the years.
It's really a marriage between the passion for what you're doing and the discipline to try to make some money on it. Whether it's professional level or professional handicapper level, if you're going to do it seriously, even for not a lot of money, you want to do your best at it. You don't want to say, oh, I'm going to allocate this amount of money. I'm no good at it. I'm going to do this. But, there are ways to balance the two. And I think that would be the important thing there. Well, we have a draft coming up, as I've heard.
I've heard that.
And it's something you and I are passionate in. You mentioned the draft betting. It's funny, as you're scaling up, I'm scaling down on draft betting. I'm just tired of getting limited every year after the draft. And some companies.
That's a good thing, though, Ron. That means you've made some money over the years.
Yeah, but then it morphs into other areas. We've determined that you no longer can have this wager in another area. So, and in a weird sort of way, they're actually scaling down draft picks now. Yep. Even Vegas and offshores and stuff like that. They're not giving that everything's bottom line instead of, everything. We're not our own company, but that's a different story. Let's talk free agency first before we get into the draft. Specifically, we've had a lot of quarterbacks change hands. I mean, a lot. And some of them look like filler types to me. The Justin Fields, the Geno Smiths, the Russell Wilsons, Sam Darnolds. I mean, some of these teams hope they're not fillers. What's the quarterback carousel? How do you feel? What's your observation so far?
Well, I did do my quarterback ratings. That's usually the first thing I do once the free agency dust settles. Is I will, take my NFL ranking. I have like a spreadsheet. I might actually make it live this year to the public. I haven't done that in 2 years of my ratings building. It's always been private. It's just, I'll say it on the shows, but the spreadsheet itself and my, working, live as I'm updating things, it's never made that, public. Maybe I'll do it this year. But that's the first thing I do is I take my rating sheet from last year, I duplicate it, and then I start to tweak. I take teams off that obviously have new quarterbacks, and I add the new quarterbacks in. I actually think Geno and Darnold have a chance for some success. Like, of the quarterbacks that are in new places this year, those are the only two that I have positive ratings on, meaning above what an average quarterback is. I have Geno at a +1.5, and I have Sam at a +1. And I think the reason is I'm not of the belief system that what Sam did last year was completely smoke and mirrors. I know a lot of people think that. Like, it was Kevin O'Connell. They had a great O-line. They had a great receiver group. Now it's to Seattle, and they lose Metcalf. They lose Lockett, and there's all these, moving parts, and he's not going to be able to replicate the same level of success. I agree to an extent. But I do think that his experience And I think their overall vibe, like I love McDonald as a coach. Like I do think they will have some success. Gino, actually, I think of all the quarterbacks that have kind of switched places in this offseason, I think Gino's the one that's set up for the most success, especially if the Raiders go out and get Ashton Genty in the draft, which maybe they will do, maybe they won't. But I really like the Chip Kelly connection in Vegas. And I think, Pete Carroll he's not going to move the needle in terms of revolutionizing coaching, but I think he offers some stability, which is important. And we all know about my guy, Brock Bowers. I think that's one of the more, secure weapons to have. So if they can figure out their offensive line and get a running back, I think Gino can have some success next year. I don't think they're going to win the Super Bowl and make the playoffs even in the AFC West. But I do think Gino is an above average quarterback with Chip Kelly as his offensive coordinator. And if they're able to solve the running back dilemma in the backfield, I do think the Raiders can have some success on offense next year.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in addition by subtraction. That's a term I've used. So if you subtract a coach that has no clue and you add a coach who has his particular vision. It happened in Los Angeles with the Chargers last year. Staley's middle, early, late game decision making left a lot to be desired, and the team just didn't tackle well. And then you bring in a Jim Harbaugh, and everything is about tackling. Everything is about his structure. He drafted differently than others, but he drafted very efficiently. And Pete Carroll may bring that same addition by subtraction into the mix. That's one of my theories there. You mentioned Aaron Rodgers before. Does he end up with Pittsburgh?
I think so. So here's what I think. Here's what I think the Rodgers situation is. We're waiting on Minnesota. And there's two factors that could happen here. I think there is a chance. First of all, we know that Aaron loves the spotlight. So he's loving this right now. We're all waiting with bated breath on where Aaron's going to end up. Like I wouldn't be shocked if ESPN did some kind of like decision, like they did for LeBron. Like
I know.
I think we're getting to that point where he is so hyper fixated on the spotlight that he's going to keep it as long as possible. So there's a chance he's already made up his mind and he's just waiting for the right moment to announce it. The way that I see the situation is I think Minnesota is lukewarm on McCarthy. I think they like him. They drafted him. Obviously they want to give him a chance, but it's a mystery box. Like he's a rookie that sat out a whole year and has very little college experience to really bank off of. So that is a big mystery box. I think there is a small part of Minnesota's front office that probably wants to bring in a veteran quarterback to kind of guide J.J. McCarthy. The problem is that's not really what Aaron Rodgers is good at. Aaron Rodgers is good at being Aaron Rodgers and focusing on himself. So I think that's why Minnesota is balking at this opportunity to bring him over. And I think that's what the holdup is. I think the holdup is Aaron knows that the Minnesota situation is better. It's in a dome, easier defenses in that division. You're not outside against the cold weather. I know you're going to play some cold weather games in Green Bay probably, but he's used to that. I think it's a better situation for him in Minnesota than Pittsburgh. I do. And I think he wants that. That's his first choice. But his first choice is kind of lukewarm on him.
I know.
Because they kind of like this McCarthy guy. So I do think the end result is he'll be in Pittsburgh, but I think it's going to be a while until we get there. Or maybe he says, screw it. Here's like the alternate reality option. He says, screw Pittsburgh. I'm not fully invested in it. I'm not going to sign there. I'm just going to wait it out and see what happens in training camp and the preseason and see if an injury pops up and see if my services are needed elsewhere. That is a risky approach because you might come up with nothing. But you might also luck into a really good situation. I don't think there's any way for us to accurately think what's going on inside of Aaron's head. I think only Aaron knows that. And we can make the educated guesses all we want. But the fact that free agency has been a month long and we don't have our answer kind of tells you that this thing's probably going to drag out. And I'll be honest, I don't even know if we're going to know before the draft, which is crazy. But I'm not 100% sure that we're going to find out before the draft.
Yeah, I piggyback on that. Minnesota, in my opinion, has been and is his first choice And I'd add one more reason to that and why he's holding out so long. Motivation plays a big part in what Aaron Rodgers, I mean, whether it's perceived a slight by somebody or he remembers things, he holds grudges. And
Oh
I
yeah.
think the chance to play against Green Bay twice and the chance to play against the team he quote unquote owns, Chicago, twice, and then to play against the Lions where he's had success and had that rivalry.
I agree.
I don't think he wants to go in and play Baltimore's physical defense
No.
twice or be matched up against Joe Burrow twice and so
Or
on.
Miles Garrett screaming down your neck twice a
That's
year.
true. There's such a gap in terms of where he sees himself that even if he likes Mike Tomlin or whatever, that he's got to put himself in a different mindset to perform well there. And it didn't go
Totally
well
agree.
in the Jets.
No.
And there wasn't a lot of motivation going in there. I mean, maybe had their record been better early, there would have been that motivation. Hey, I've still got it, and so on. But once the season went a different way, so did he.
Agreed.
And if I remember correctly, you're a Jet fan, so
I am.
so you know firsthand where that's going. What are the Jets going to do in the draft? Let's go right to the Jets.
Oh, offensive line makes sense. I mean, I think they're in kind of a weird spot. They're not really high enough, because your thought process is, can they get one of these quarterbacks? Is one of these quarterbacks worth it? Everything I've heard from my sources about the quarterback situation in this draft, it's very average. Cam Ward's going to go 1 because he has the most NFL tools in his toolbox, but the other 2 guys have significant holes. I think Jackson Dart, go back and watch the second half of the game against Florida, and you tell me if you think Jackson Dart's an NFL quarterback. I think there's a level of, now again, he could grow and mature. And I think that's what some teams are hoping for because he has the physical tools to succeed. But in the NFL, I think there's a level of calm, cool, collected, right? We say high ceiling, low floor.
Yeah.
I think that's where I feel about Jackson Dart. Shador's the opposite. Lower ceiling, higher floor. Because Shador doesn't have those physical tools to escape and be mobile and make the Mahomes type wow plays. But what Shador does have, arm strength, accuracy, and I would say more of a NFL brain, right? First of all, he's the son of an NFL player who is arguably one of the best NFL players in our generation. But also, he has seen more experience because he's been around the game more. And I think he has a little bit more of a level head to him with his quarterback play. Very accurate, elite placer of the football. Those are traits that NFL GMs want. But the problem is he doesn't have that escapability and the ability to avoid sacks. That's where the NFL game is limited, lower ceiling. So a lot of it is what's your taste, right? Some people like Chinese food. Some people like Italian food. Some GMs are going to see Shador Sanders and say, steady Eddie. That's exactly what we need. Some GMs are going to see Shador Sanders and say, he can't make the great play. Not what I want as a quarterback. It's all about the GM and the scouting department and what they value. So you have to take that into consideration when you're handicapping these quarterbacks, this crop of quarterbacks. The Cam Ward situation's easy. The Titans need a quarterback. We've all watched Will Levis. He's the best of this bunch. He's going to go 1. The odds are basically screaming at it. The Jets, again, I think we're kind of in no man's land here. I don't think they view Shador or Jackson Dart as a top 7 pick. And I think that's where they're probably going to look away from getting a quarterback. But Justin Fields, probably going to do a lot of running this year. The Jets offense, probably going to do a lot of running this year with Breece Hall, and they got a couple, and Allen. They got 2 really good backs. Offensive line makes sense for me for the Jets. I know there's 2 guys that are in the top tier, Campbell and Memhard. I can't pronounce his name. I would say it's going to be one of those 2 guys.
Okay. Yeah, I think a few years ago, there was a no-win, no-lose situation when I was handicapping the draft. Do the Cincinnati Bengals draft Penei Sewell or Chase? And I would have been comfortable with either one, and they're happy with where they went. Last year, the Jets faced that situation in a way, too. Offensive line was an incredible need, and Brock Bowers was sitting there as well. Now, I would throw the name Tyler Warren as a tight end. Is it
Yeah,
offensive line or tight end for the Jets? There's
it's a good
something to think
question.
about.
It's a good question because last year, so I made 2 bets on our pal Brock Bowers last year.
Yeah.
The first one was to go to the Jets, and I got some really good closing line value on that because that was the report that the Jets love Bowers, and that made a ton of sense schematically. They have Garrett Wilson, they have Devontae Adams, who at the time they didn't, but they were planning on getting him later, right? They have Aaron Rodgers. They have great running backs. But now you just plop a tight end in there and cooking with gas. They decided to go the offensive lineman route instead. And I understand. I think Fashano's a great player. Penn State guy. I'm a Penn State guy. I'm not upset with that. But what it did is it allowed the real Brock Bowers gamble that I made to come to fruition, which is to go to the Raiders. I think this year, Tyler Warren it would be ironic if the Jets took Penn State players back-to-back years in the first round. That would be ironic. I'd actually be very happy about that, frankly. It'd almost be like a reinforcement that I'm rooting for the right team, that they took my alma mater's best player in back-to-back drafts in the first round. Tyler Warren's going to be he's going to be an all-pro tight end. I do believe that. I think he might be one of the surest bets in the draft in terms of his ceiling, or excuse me, his floor. Like, he might have one of the highest floors at his position in the entire draft. The problem is he plays a non-premium position. Although what Bowers did last year might change some GM's feelings about taking a tight end in the top 8. Like, that's usually the case against taking a tight end, is how many catches are they actually going to have? How much upside can they actually bring to your offense in year one that you're willing to take a top 10 pick in a tight end? Maybe Bowers last year kind of shows some GMs that it is possible to have an elite all-pro caliber kind of year as a rookie tight end. Even with a bad quarterback too with the Raiders, that even makes it more crazy considering the quarterback throwing to Bowers all year, and he still had, 1,300 yards.
Yeah, it was crazy. My advice to GMs who won't take my advice, which is fine, keep doing what you're doing, GMs, is that my contrarian view is tight ends are very important in the NFL. The Oakland Raiders, way before your time with Casper and Chester, revolutionized the 2 tight ends. And then Baltimore did it. And then New England did it, although one of the guys, Aaron Hernandez, had his own set of problems. But they had Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez from the same draft. If you look at playoff teams, one of the constants is that most of the playoff teams are going to have a top 10 to 15 tight end. And most of the non-playoff teams, Raiders accepted and so on, are struggling at that position. It's just one of those constants. And it's also good for a rookie quarterback to have that. Ending the quarterback discussion, though, my take on Jackson Dart, just for the record, is it's all about person-team fit when it's all done. I have my ratings for all these positions, but where they go matters. And some of these guys may not actually pan out because they went to the wrong team. I'm curious as to where Dart ends up, because it's a very important place that he needs to be. He's kind of like Baker Mayfield light to me, a linebacker mentality who will do everything for the team. I mean, he'll sacrifice his body, he'll run, he'll do this and do that, but he doesn't have Baker Mayfield's passing intuition at this point. He has that mindset that Baker Mayfield has, but Baker Mayfield has far exceeded my expectations, and he's put back-to-back unbelievable years in play, and was the one play that I had a good year with season wins, and one of my top plays was Tampa under, and that failed. And Baker Mayfield deserves all the credit in the world for making that happen without his top 2 wide receivers for a good stretch of the season. Anyway, that's an aside. How do you work with handicapping new GMs, new coaches? Because, that's the danger in trying to say Jacksonville is going to draft so-and-so, or Cleveland's going to draft so-and-so, pick your year and stuff like that, because they have new regimes.
Well, it's funny. Our mutual friend Cleb Thier does a really good off-season guide about that, where he did I was trying to pull it up before I came. He did like a tendencies for certain draft GMs in the first round, and and I think he even goes further, second, the round, and the later rounds of like the percentages that they take a certain position. I think that is very actionable information. And again, it takes a lot of work to keep that information current, and that's why he does it. I mean, he honestly, the group of handicappers that I like, the circle, right? We talk about social circles all the time, right? Like the circle of information that I've built around me has become very valuable. I think that is the most important thing, and it ties into the GM conversation. I think that is the most important thing for an NFL draft handicapper to keep in mind. Where are you getting your information from? Is it consistent, and is it reliable? Are you getting it from the meme Twitter accounts that post rumors? Is that what you're using your information from? Is that your source? Or do you have a handful of people around you who are successful at this that you trust, that you just, absorb? Anytime they put something out, you read it, you absorb it, you apply it to your process. I think that is the most important thing with draft betting. Keep your circle tight, know who you can trust, and then absorb, be a sponge. Just be a sponge and absorb as much information as possible, apply it to your process, use the odds as a guide. Where are you compared to where they're at? And is there value there? Is there difference between where this person is saying this could happen and what the odds are saying? And it's just a constant back and forth between the source and the odds, and the source and the odds. And you're constantly updating and tweaking. Like, I have a mock draft. Usually I only do one round, because anything past that, I don't have the brain for it. And I'm constantly tweaking it. I'm constantly updating it. I'm constantly tweaking where I think a team will go. Another thing that I do very early on in my offseason process is I update my coaching tree. General manager, head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. I have a chart, every single team, and I put a highlight next to the new ones. For example, I know that Vegas is the only team in the NFL. Excuse me, not Vegas. Vegas has 3 out of 4. The Jets. The Jets are the only team in the NFL next year. Core 4, completely new. GM, head coach, OC, DC. All 4 are brand new. They've never held those positions with those teams before. And period. I think Steve Wilkes has been a defensive coordinator somewhere. But
he was fired, but he was.
Yeah, a long time ago. Essentially a fresh start. Vegas is 3 out of 4, right? New GM, new head coach, new offensive coordinator. They retained Patrick Graham, the DC. But for the most part, those 2 teams, completely fresh start. Any information about prior years with those teams, not as relevant, because the coaches, GM, the coordinators, they're all different. You have to know that and then apply it to how you're handicapping the Raiders next year and the Jets.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a connect the dot kind of situation now. Who's making the decisions? Is it team oriented and so on? And then there's some behind the scenes things too. Top 30 visits. It's interesting, the analysis of top 30 visits. Some it's a smoke screen. They just want to know, have injuries healed and so on. Some they really rely on that. You can tell that they're going to do that. Some, I love it because they're not concerned with just the first round. They're bringing in people that they may even sign as street free agents, but they're getting a look at them. And some just concentrate solely on the first round. Jerry Jones, are you listening to me? And so they have no clue in terms of some of the other stuff. So it's a connect the dot business, and it's really interesting to go through that. I also kind of look for tendencies that particular way. Jared, what surprises? I mean, does the draft start at number 4? Does it start at number 2? Where do you see the first curveball coming in?
The draft definitely starts at 2 this year. Like, the odds are saying Travis Hunter is a lock. I don't know. I don't know what Cleveland's going to do. I don't. They need a quarterback desperately. I don't know what they're going to do. I thought Cousins was an option, and now obviously that's not the case. It seems like he's going to stay in Atlanta. There is a chance there's a chance that someone views Abdul Carter as a Bruce Will, like a Bruce Smith kind of Reggie White kind of player. And he's the number one player on probably a lot of people's draft boards. And they're going to see him at 2 and they're going to say, man, that's a steal. And they're going to try to get into that spot. I could see that. I could see Cleveland thinking, we have a lot of holes and we can draft one player who can fill 2 holes. I know that sounds a little crass, but that is what Travis could potentially be. I just don't know if he's a starter on both sides of the ball. I don't think he is. I don't know if that's possible in today's NFL because of, and I think physically he can play both. But I think the thing that a lot of people fail to realize in the NFL, the amount of information you have to download into your brain to play one position is a whole week's worth of work. Does he have the mental capacity to handle 2 preps throughout the week? Starter on offense, starter on defense. All of the different nuances that go into an NFL playbook, understanding both sides. Like, I don't know if he can handle that. If he can, then he's probably the number 2 pick to Cleveland. If Cleveland thinks he can handle that. I think there's 2 different options that I see, though. I absolutely see Carter as, in my opinion, the best player in the draft. You plop him into that rush end spot, and he is going to be productive every single year at a premium position. That's how I view Abdul Carter. I think a lot of teams are going to view that as the best overall player on their board. So if he does drop to 2, which it looks like he's going to, there might be some teams that are very interested in that. But yeah, I think 2, 3, like I would be very surprised if Abdul Carter was available. I'm seeing some mock drafts where the Giants take a quarterback, Shedeur Sanders at 3, and Travis Hunter's at 2. So you're telling me that the best overall player that a lot of people think in this draft is going to drop to 4? Like I find that hard to believe. So I do think Carter and Hunter 2, 3, maybe they flip the way that they go, but I do think the top 3 picks are going to be Ward, Hunter, and Carter. I'd be shocked if it's not those 3. I just don't know what order. I don't know if Carter is going to go before Hunter because it looks like the steam on Travis Hunter is pretty real to go 2.
Yep, a lot of steam there. I personally like Carter a little bit better because the physicality of Hunter. He's going to have to withstand a lot of beating and stuff. Mentally, I know he can handle it, Hunter. Physically, I don't know. The question is, what's Cleveland going to do? They haven't had a first-round pick in a long time, so
True.
We'll see where they go on that. We had a question. I appreciate questions from the audience, and I don't know. Let me go to this one here.
Russell Saylor. I see him a lot in our bet.
Russell says Cleveland ought to bring in Wentz and draft Carter.
I think Carson Wentz is not meant.
He's done. But Kirk Cousins, don't rule him out yet. He's waiting to see who does not select a quarterback.
That's a good. That is a good nugget. I do think I agree on Kirk Cousins. It seems like he's had some positive conversations with Atlanta, but that's a guy that could be a starter for a team on day one. He really could. Yeah. He has the ability to absorb an offense quickly. He does.
Yeah, and I think Cleveland can be creative in their trade packages. It could be a 5th. It could be a 6th. It could be based on playing time. They've gone ahead and stockpiled draft picks now like they used to back when they were doing the analytic thing. So look for that. A little too early, maybe to get into. These are Alabama players. Booker, the offensive guard tackle, and Campbell. They're both first rounders for me, but I haven't slotted where they're going to go. I have a feeling Booker, if you ask me right now, I think Campbell is in the teens and Booker's late in the first round, but they're both in the first round and they're both very viable players at their positions.
Yeah. I haven't done anything on those 2 guys yet. Campbell's a stud. I think there's definitely going to be – I saw the Lions did a big write-up on him. That could be an interesting spot. I think the Lions are going to go defense in that first round. I think that makes sense to me. I just don't know who or will be available at that point. I think they pick 30th, 29th?
Yeah, way back there are 28, I believe.
28.
29,
yeah, Campbell probably won't be there. I'm actually not familiar really with Booker. Campbell I'm familiar with. I'm not familiar with Booker as much.
Yeah, Booker has position flexibility, so that's something a lot of teams are interested in. He'd be a dynamite offensive guard. We'll see
Oh, he's on
where
the
he
offensive side.
exactly
Yeah.
ends up. So, yeah, Detroit's unpredictable, and they are one of those teams with a tendency to trade up. Don't really know how to trade down, but that could be for another day here. Any other things before we get to a couple of real quick hitters? Any other things on the draft that you want to
No,
mention?
honestly, I think, and for the people watching this show, obviously they're fans of yours if they're on their YouTube channel. Your draft process has helped me significantly over the last couple of years that we've been in contact. I think you have a really level head about how you approach the draft. And I think that's a good piece of advice. Don't worry about who you want your team to take. You are handicapping the general managers, their history. If they don't have history, the team needs, and that's really all you can do. And then you compare that to what the odds are and you try to find value. Like, honestly, it's a lot of times draft betting is, oh, this guy would be a great fit. I want this guy on my team. Like, that's irrelevant. Same thing with the awards markets in baseball, football.
Yeah.
Like, it's not who you think is going to win. You are handicapping who the voters are voting for. You are handicapping who the general managers are going to take. That is your sole focus.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be flexible. You have to parse out the information. And it's funny because now there's only 10 minutes between picks. There used to be 15, and then there's 5 later on in the draft or whatever. These guys are not immune to impulse. They say
you
3
see the
offensive line
videos
just
of
came on the
them
board.
before the picks. We now are privy to that information. You see how chaotic it is in the moments leading up to the picks. A lot of times it is pure madness.
Yeah.
Calling 3 different guys at the same time. Hey, you got this. I want this. Like, it's crazy. It's really entertaining, but it's also crazy.
People are running up to the podium in past years. People are doing, I mean, it's very strange. Let's deviate for a couple of quick hitters before I let you go. Thanks for spending all this time educating the audience and speaking with me, because I love speaking with you. New kickoff rules, that's going to impact handicapping, much less field position and everything else. Do you like it? What are your thoughts on it?
I'm fine with it. I agree it's going to impact totals. I think certain teams, maybe more old school coaches, will say, because last year there was a point where teams were just like, just screw it. Give them the ball at the 30. We'll take the touchback.
Yeah.
I don't think the 5 yards is going to deter a significant amount of coaches away from that strategy. Because last year we did learn that returns are dangerous. There's more returns breaking for big yardage with this new dynamic kickoff. There's going to be coaches that just say, after a few weeks, screw it. Just take the 35 and we'll go from there. We need a few weeks of data to kind of figure out who those coaches are going to be first. But I'm convinced that there will be a few that just don't want any of the risk involved with these kickoff returns, because we got popped for a return touchdown a couple weeks ago, and we're only going to make that mistake once. And then there'll be some really gung-ho special teams coaches that are going to figure out ways to try to kind of get around it, right? And, set up new, right? Because now that's the next level of this. We have a full year of the dynamic kickoff returns. So that means a full year of these returns on tape. All right. What are the adjustments now from that first year? And again, those are hard for us on the outside to predict. We have to allow the process to actually play out first, and then we can react to it. I do think there will be some nuance and there will be some edge. I don't know exactly where the chips are going to fall yet, because I need at least, I would say, 2 weeks of, is this coach okay with a touchback or is he not?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I think it's the next step in the evolution is how do defenses do that kick inside that area and then stop them at the 20-yard line now instead of 25. What is it, very high? Is it this? Is it that? The 2 reasons I don't like the rule is, number one, you're 1 first down and 4th and 5 away from a 54-yard field goal. So immediately, you don't have to move the ball but 20 yards or something like that, and you're already in field goal range, 25 yards. So that's,
I would say,
kind
25 yards
thing.
and you're in field goal range. Yeah.
And then I think offenses are going to be more, maybe this is an NFL thing because they like scoring anyway, and I don't. But offenses, if they start at the 35 instead of starting at the old 25 and stuff, they're going to open it up a little more. There's going to be more passing. There's going to be more draw plays and stuff like that. So you're going to see teams less worried about, wow, we're deep in our own end zone, because we're not deep in our own end zone. We're getting the ball 1/3 of the way down the field.
I agree.
Very weird to me. So
I think the net result, more scoring. I think that at the end of the day, like if you were going to ask me what's your biggest takeaway from the new kickoff rule, totals are going to go up. Period. Yeah. End of story.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of an interesting, we're all going to learn the first 2-3 weeks.
Yep.
Sportsbook industry. This is a general question, probably could be its own topic, but just for, what's being in Vegas, and you have all those sports books, they're trying to get in, they're out, there's legislation. Some states like my California still doesn't have it. What's your general thought on the state of the sportsbook industry right now?
Oh, that's such a good question. I would say tumult, as my Jewish mother would say. A lot of tumult. There's just no stability at all. I think we're moving in a direction of consolidation. We've already seen, for example, Westgate here in town in Vegas. They've already shuttered their Arizona and I think Maryland books. We've already seen several other smaller shops condense and combine with other ones. I think that makes sense to me over the next, like if you were going to say, what's your biggest takeaway from the gambling industry 10 years down the road? Fewer sports books, more exchanges. I think that's the future. I think the exchange model, Kalshi also, they just want a big injunction here in Nevada to be able to still trade their sport contracts. I think futures, right? Like exchanges, different derivative models of sports betting, I think are going to become a thing. And less traditional gambling entities. I think the exchanges are great because the VIG is lower. And that's frankly the whole, like, that's it. Like you can all of a sudden go from -110 to -105 on every single bet you make. You're going to make more money. If you're a professional gambler, if you're successful at it, you're going to make significantly more money. I think that's very attractive to a lot of the big everyday gamblers in our space. Exchanges, peer-to-peer. I think that's going to be huge. The regulation is slow. I think California and Texas are obviously, everyone's eyes are on those two states. I think eventually they'll get across the finish line. I have no idea when. California, it looked like we might have a resolution next year. And then, like it feels like one step forward, two steps back with the traditional legislative model for sports betting. I think we had a boom and now we're kind of, like almost you're floating. We're waiting for the next, market moving event state to come online and push the market forward, because the way that the current landscape is, the gambling industry cannot evolve until there are more people eligible to bet. We've reached that saturation point of no more promos, no more boosts. Like there's no more money to be spent because we've already captured all of the market. And until there is more market to capture in California, Texas, Georgia had a bill that I think recently got declined. Until those states adapt professional or legalized gambling, the market has nowhere to go but stagnant. In terms of the content side, it's a freaking disaster. I think sports books are starting to realize hiring celebrities is not the answer. I think they're starting to realize you need to focus on your customer base and you need to focus on, giving them the best product. The problem is that's expensive to do and the tax rate's really high. This is why I think the exchanges are the future, Ron. I honestly do. I think in 10 years, there'll be as many prominent betting exchanges as there are prominent sports books.
Okay.
And I could see a lot of, the because the biggest problem the pros have right now is they're getting limited at all these big box shops.
Yeah.
Well, you go to an exchange and you don't have that problem. So I think that will be a big factor over the next decade, is the growth of betting exchanges.
Yeah, it's a very competitive market, not only for content, in the industry to bring this content to people, but also in getting the handicapping dollars. And it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. lives. I have just one question or something that you can comment on before we wrap up. And that's really something that I think would be very valuable to close with, and that's health. You talk about, I know you have a workout regime. When we saw each other in August, you were fit, you were doing the different things, you were throwing the football and, in the middle of downtown. But that, if you do this every day, like you do in one way, shape or another, and in the heat of the football season, that balance is so important. If you could just talk a little bit more about how important that is for your handicapping as well as your health.
It's everything. I think the stereotype of a gambler is overweight, in the basement, clicking buttons all day, not healthy. Physically. Mentally, they might be really sharp, but physically, they're not healthy. The problem is your physical health feeds your mental health. What you put in your body, how you treat your body, all of that is correlated to how much output you can, exceed on a daily basis with your mindset. Discipline is key in gambling. It is key in fitness. I have noticed a significant increase in my mental capacity to handle the swings, to handle the rigors of watching an 18-year-old miss a free throw and lose a bet. The ability to step away and step into a outlet for that stress has allowed me to spend more time and effort back in the grind. I can grind for longer and harder because I know I am fit enough to handle it. I don't have any doubts anymore about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's almost like middle school, elementary school. Like you have different classes. Recess, gym was always part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Every handicapper needs their chemistry, right? Their numbers and their science and their math and their English. You need gym class as well. You need to spend at least 30 minutes to an hour every single day working out your mind and your body. It will make your handicapping better in the long run. I promise you. I promise you.
Wonderful, wonderful point to end on. I think that's fantastic. Jared, thanks so much for joining me on the show. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Anybody who, you've got all these followers, but if anybody who hasn't seen what you've done in terms of the Bet US show during the football season or what you're doing right now and all the different sports you covered, you're missing out. So definitely, Jared will have some thoughts, I'm sure, on social media about the draft, about everything else. So thanks again for joining me on this show. I'm back next week. And oh my goodness, one other person and myself, and that number 85 is not a misnomer as you run across. The two of us will have 85 years of writing about the draft. And so these next two shows are going to be very draft centric before we get into some other stuff again. So join me again next week. Subscribe to the channel. Enjoy there's no more off season now. We're into the draft now. Football
there
fans.
Is no, honestly, Ron, the off season doesn't exist. The off season exists in my head for like 5 minutes, and then I'm right back into the grind.
And the NFL thinks that they're missing out, then they invent a story to talk about that point. But thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And I'll be back next week with another show on the Fireside Football Podcast.